And
Yep.
writing is like no go, it's just too slow. So
Yep.
typing helped. Now I have this huge list and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And what do I do with it? It's like so much. How do I work through these things? And I see a lot of it is happened because of causes and conditions at that point in time. I don't want to go back and place blame or point the blaming finger. But what do I do with it now? I feel like it's all like after the fact.
Yes, it is. Perhaps you could go through the list and see which of those programs are still running now. So which ones are you still finding like on a daily basis? And which ones are applicable to your life right now? And then you'll be able to work with those feelings as you're having them on during the day. So this is where Vipassana, mindfulness, mixes with the forgiveness practice. So we're monitoring our mind, watching our mental states, and then we can then, having seen a mental state that we know is part of a pattern, part of a habit, then we can actually then use the forgiveness practice, use the points and the questions of the forgiveness practice to objectify our investigation of that mental state. And that to me works very, very well. In fact, that also would be applicable to Rayhan's question about addictions, because if you find that you're addicted to something, you can actually do the second step of forgiveness, and it's already written down in my book, and you can go through that. By the way, if Turkish friends don't have you can get the Forgiveness for Everyone in Türkçe. It's on our website, isn't it, Emel? Yeah, Rayhan? So
I didn't see it, only little book we have.
On the website, there is a Turkish version of Forgiveness for Everyone, and that will take you to the second step of forgiveness, which is then listing out the questions that you can ask yourself with regard to any addictions that you have also. Not only addictions, but repeated behaviors, habits that you feel are not serving you or helping you in your life. So what we find is that any habit, repetitive nature and behavior of the mind that's caused us suffering, both in the past and in the present, then we can use the steps of forgiveness or the questions of forgiveness to help us to understand more deeply how we are harming ourselves. And we can then start to free the mind up, even if it's only a little bit.
Jeff, I have two sub questions in relation to what you just shared.
Okay.
The first one is how you mentioned about objectifying the mental state. Can you elaborate more on that? And the second thing is whatever that I've typed out.
I'll do one at a time.
Yeah.
Objectifying the mental state. It's one of the skills that we have in Vipassana practice. And one way that we can do it is just by labeling or naming whatever it is that we find. So just say, for example, even right now, perhaps I'm not feeling it, but for example, if I was feeling excited about running this Zoom, then actually I'm pretty comfortable about it. But if I was excited, I could even just say to myself, in my mind, I could even label it and just stop for a second and just say to myself, excited, excited, excited. And really what I'm doing is I'm drawing my attention inwardly toward that excited feeling. And by just saying the word, what I'm doing is I'm cutting out the story that's making me excited. So if I did that now, I closed my eyes and I just said to myself, excited, excited, excited. What would happen is that I would forget that I'm sitting in front of a Zoom class. I would lose the story that was causing the excitement in my mind. And by just saying the word excited, excited, and feeling the excitement and seeing the story pass away, quite often I've brought my mind back to an objective, well, already it was objective because I just was naming it. So that's one of the best tips that I can give you, is to just name the process and even keep naming it. At first, it's a bit weird to, like, you might be feeling angry and you just say to yourself, but if you can, just stop and just say angry, 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 angry. Even the word, it's not a story. It's not, the word angry doesn't make you more angry. Sometimes it might, but you get over that. And what happens is, by repeating that word, it's doing two things. One, it's cutting out the story. And secondly, you're directing your attention towards the anger itself. So this then actually transforms the mind. So try. And what was the second part?
The second part was, you were saying to go through the list and see what is actually active. I find that a lot of the things that I typed are active. So then I find myself a bit overwhelmed with the grand list. And I'm like, oh, what do I do with all this shit now? Sorry for my language, because
That's
I've
all right.
uncovered, like I put out on the table all the stuff and I'm like, what do I do with it now?
Okay. Funny thing is, then you look at the overwhelming, take the one that, actually look at the actual overwhelming experience that you're having in the present moment. Like if you put all that out, or you look at the list and you go, oh, I feel so overwhelmed. So observe the overwhelmed feeling. It's not on your list, but it is the experience that you're having at the moment. The best way to sort out an overwhelming experience or a confusing experience is to just come back to one experience. So even if you just said to yourself, overwhelmed, overwhelming, overwhelming, maybe you also realize, well, it's not really overwhelming. Maybe I don't want to do this. Maybe it's actually resistance, resisting, resisting. Maybe there's a fear to actually look at this list. Fear, afraid, scared, worrying. And you will actually notice that even from the initial word that you called it, it actually starts to transform, or you see it in a different light. And after a while, by just naming that experience, it all calms down. Now look back at the list and you'll find that, well, it's just a list of words. But let me see which one jumps out at me. What do I feel is the priority? So you could go either way. You could say, what is the most important one, the strongest one, and deal with that? Or you could go to start with the weakest one and just kind of warm up your forgiveness by just dealing with some of the less powerful mental states, which is actually the best one that I would recommend. Yeah. So it's kind of like when you brainstorm yourself, and then you just when you do a brainstorm, you could like prioritize and say, okay, out of all these things that I've found, for example, in my mind, then let me prioritize the most important, and then even you can put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and actually list them in an order. But in this case, what you could do is say, well, what's the easiest one for me to deal with? What's the least important? What's going to be easy for me to see through? And what that does is it gives you some encouragement in the forgiveness process. And you look at it and you go, well, it's not really a problem. You go through the steps, asking yourself, how do I harm myself? Why do I harm myself in this way? And am I wise, etc., etc. And you realize sometimes even halfway through, this really isn't significant. Move to the next one and kind of work your way through the list, maybe starting with the weakest and the easiest. How's that?
Yeah, I think you rightly pointed out that maybe in addition to the overwhelm are also feelings of like resistance and
Yeah.
feel like, no, I'm not really sure if I want to do this or
Absolutely.
go there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there is definitely that.
Yeah, it's daunting. And, you know, when that comes up in the mind, not only in this kind of situation, that overwhelming, daunting feeling can come up in many or any situations in life. It can come up in personal relationships. It can come up in work situations. It can come up in, you know, sometimes even just having to make decisions, etc. So it's really useful in this situation to be able to stop and pause and even look into, well, what is this overwhelming situation or this overwhelming mental state, and even inquire into that. Is it really overwhelming, or am I just trying to find an excuse not to do this? Because the mind is really clever, and it will say, oh, this is overwhelming, I can't do this. Actually, that's bullshit. So it's just trying to dodge doing the hard work. But when we start to notice how the mind is really very deceptive and really tricky, then when we start to catch that and we start to do the opposite, we flip it on its head, which was last week or the week before, was one of the topics that I used, to just do the opposite of what the mind expects that it's going to do. So that means if you find a habit that always does things the same way, flip it on its head and do it upside down, do it backwards, do it inside out. And at first it kind of goes, no, 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 don't disturb the status quo, don't change things, especially if you're a perfectionist. And the beautiful thing is then that you'll start to see how stuck you are. Not only you, but us. We find how stuck we are in our patterns and our habits, and then we start to change. And these changes can be really very transformative, because we're finding key patterns that are operating the mind. And when we start to explore them, we realize how even childish they are, how out of date they are, how useless they are. When we really see that for ourselves, then they start to fall away. They start to transform.
Wow, this deceptivity that you mentioned, I think is like, I felt like, whoa, yeah, it is deceptive, and I can feel my like flares coming up already when you say turn it on its head and do it the opposite. Like I'm like, no way. Like something inside is
Excellent.
like, no way, I'm not doing it. So
Excellent.
I have to, there's something I have to look into.
Fantastic.
I'm resisting all of that. I'm like, no, don't touch.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the mind will say, oh, don't open that cupboard, don't go down that corridor, don't go through that gate. Because the ego, it's so deceptive that what it does is it hides things from itself. It's so stupid and so childish, but it does it. It's almost as if it's trying to protect itself, but it doesn't work. It actually just confuses itself. And yeah, I was almost going to say, I'll just say it anyway, that actually we're living in our own little matrix. It's like the ego thinks that it's the king of all these mental states and all these things that's going on, and it sets up its own little world that it lives in, and it tries to be the master of that world. But actually, it's just it's an illusion. It's a dream. It's actually emptiness, but we don't see it. We take it to be real. So in Vipassana, what we're doing is we're starting to connect with things that we know are definitely real. So for example, your breath, or as friends will know here, I'm often saying to connect with the earth. you know, feel where your body is connecting with the earth, to feel the heat in the body, to feel the chi in the body, the actual, like the buzzing, humming electric energy that is always flowing through the body. So when you connect to these things, connect to gravity, to feel the pull of gravity down to the earth. When we connect to these things that are always present, every single moment of your life, then the ego can't argue with this stuff. You know, it can't say, oh, no, I'm not breathing now, or this is not the in-breath, this is not the out-breath. Maybe at first, if you have a particularly troubled ego, it will start to really, really fight and really squirm and really say, no, we're not going to meditate, we're not going to do this. But that's because the ego is afraid that it's going to be exposed for what it is. And what it is just, it's like a pirate program that's running the mind. And the mind, the mind is actually quite pure. It's quite beautiful. It's quite a phenomenal series or range of mental states. I was even going to say a circuit or system of mental states when it's functioning at its premium and optimum level. But the ego really sabotages itself, and that's one of the things that we find when we start doing forgiveness for ourselves. When you ask that question, how do I harm myself? You'll actually find that quite often you are self-sabotaging, and self-sabotaging doesn't help anybody. And it's even the self that's sabotaging itself. It's attacking itself. It's destroying itself. This just doesn't make sense. This is really madness. This is really delusion, really ignorance. So we need to be able to identify these mental states and start to even question into them. You know, how do I do this? Why do I do this? Am I aware? Am I wise? What's the intention behind this? Am I sorry to myself? And then reflecting, you know, that's what I've been doing for however many decades, I don't know. That's how I was, not how I am, and not how I want to be. Then I'm sorry, and I forgive myself. And if you do this very honestly, very sincerely, it can really start to unravel these old patterns that just don't serve us anymore. So thank you very much, Lynn. We got a lot of work to do, haven't we?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking. Okay, so a few more regular friends have turned up, maybe a few irregular friends as well. There's Lek in Kung Thep. Sawadee Kun Lek. And Yip Wan Fun in Malaysia, and Katya. Hi, Katya. In Ankara, of course. And Melody is in London with her mum, Barna, and Alexandra is here too, I think. Yeah. Okay. So, welcome, friends. Hi, Katya. Welcome. Glad you could join again. So, I'm going to move on to tonight's topic.